Good evening, and welcome back to SleepWise. If you're returning tonight, and this quiet place has helped you before, you can follow the show, share it with someone you care about, and let this small ritual become easier to find again. And if you're new, welcome. There's nothing you need to catch up on, nothing you need to prove, nothing you need to hold in your head. Tonight, we're drifting into a sleepy summary of The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Not a book about formulas or clever tricks, or the kind of finance that feels like a bright screen in a dark room. It's a book about behavior, about what people do with money when life is uncertain, when the future refuses to hold still, and when emotions quietly steer the wheel. Because in real life, money decisions are rarely just numbers. They are memory and timing and fear and pride. They are the households we grew up in. The first paycheck that felt like freedom. The first bill that felt like gravity. The first market headline that made the stomach tighten for no clear reason. And the strange thing is, two people can look at the same world, the same economy, the same charts, the same prices moving up and down, and walk away with completely different outcomes. Not because one is smarter, but because one needed the money sooner or later. Because one had a cushion and one didn't. Because one lived through a crash at the exact wrong age, and the other lived through a boom at the exact right one. So tonight, we'll slow all of this down until it becomes gentle. We'll talk about luck and risk, the invisible twins that hide inside every story of success and failure. We'll talk about the room you didn't see, the outcomes that could have happened but didn't, and how quietly dangerous it is to judge life only by what you can point to. We'll talk about enough, and why chasing more can sometimes steal the very peace money was meant to protect. We'll talk about the difference between looking rich and being wealthy, and how the most powerful kind of wealth is often the kind nobody notices. And through it all, we'll return to one calm idea, that the best financial plan is not the one that looks perfect on paper. It's the one you can live with, the one you can stick with when you're tired, when you're stressed, when the world gets loud and certainty feels tempting. So, as you listen, let your body begin to power down. Let the shoulders soften, as if a heavy coat has been unbuttoned and set aside. Let the jaw unclench, the forehead smooth, the breath lengthen like a tide that doesn't hurry. You don't have to do anything with these ideas tonight. If something lands, it can stay. If it doesn't, it can drift on by, like a boat passing quietly in the dark. And now, with the room dim and the world a little farther away, we begin not with money as math, but with money as a story we tell ourselves about safety and time and what it means to be okay. Tonight, we drift a little deeper into the quiet premise beneath this whole book, that money is not a strict science, the way gravity is. It is closer to weather, made of patterns and pressures, but also moods, surprises, and moments that change the whole forecast. You can know every rule of investing and still make choices that don't fit you. And you can break a few rules, yet build a life that feels steady because you understood your own mind. That's why personal finance is more personal than it is financial. Two people can read the same advice, and one will feel comfort while the other feels trapped, because each person is carrying a different history into the room. A child who grew up watching parents worry about rent learns a different definition of safety than a child who watched bills get paid without a word. Someone who began adulthood during a long, smooth bull market learns a different definition of normal than someone who started their first job in a recession when fear was in the air like dust. These differences aren't small. They become the invisible lens through which we interpret every headline, every paycheck, every opportunity, every risk. And because of that, money decisions are rarely neat. They're stories we tell ourselves about who we are, what could happen, and what we must never let happen again. Think about the phrases people whisper to themselves, even if they never say them out loud. I just need to feel secure. I can't fall behind. If I miss this, I'll regret it forever. If I spend this, I'll be irresponsible. Those sentences are not math. They are emotion, stitched to memory, wrapped around uncertainty. And uncertainty is the true backdrop of money. We never get to make decisions with the full map in front of us, lit up and complete. We choose in partial light while the future shifts its shape and life adds its own surprises. An illness, a move, a new job, a child, a loss, a windfall, a year that doesn't go as planned. So the goal is not to become a perfect predictor. The goal is to become someone who can move through uncertainty without breaking. Someone who can hold a plan gently and still follow it. Tonight, as you listen, imagine those stories like soft pages in a family album. Not proof of intelligence, not proof of character, just memories shaping instinct quietly over years. When you understand that, you stop arguing with the world as if it should behave like a spreadsheet. You start building a plan that behaves like you, calm, resilient, and able to last. And if a thought arrives tonight about a past mistake, a missed chance, a moment you wish you could redo, let it soften. This story is not about judging yourself for being human. It's about learning the human shape of money and letting that understanding make your next steps quieter. Now, with that premise resting beside us, we can look at one of the book's gentlest truths, that outcomes depend on timing as much as talent. Picture two people walking into the same market, like two travelers arriving at the same coastline. They both see the same ocean, the same waves, the same horizon. But one arrives at low tide, when the water is calm and generous, and the other arrives in a storm. In investing, a decade can feel like a lifetime. If you start saving when markets rise steadily, It's easier to believe that growth is normal, that risk is manageable, that patience will always be rewarded. If you start during a crash, when headlines shout, when friends lose jobs, when prices fall like stones, your nervous system learns a different lesson, and it's a lesson that stays. This is why the same return on paper can mean two different lives. One person might need their money at the exact moment markets dip, forcing them to sell when they're least ready. Another might have time, or a cushion, or a steady income, and can simply wait, letting the storm pass without making desperate choices. Even outside markets, timing shapes everything. A raise means something different if it arrives before you have children versus after. A bonus feels different if it comes during a year of medical bills versus a year of calm. And a small emergency fund can feel like nothing until the day it becomes the line between panic and composure. So when you hear advice that sounds absolute, always do this, never do that, remember the coastline. Remember that people stand in different weather. Their needs are different, their deadlines are different, their temperaments are different, and the stakes in their lives are different. The point is not to copy the person who looks most confident. The point is to build a plan that fits your own calendar, your own cash flow, your own ability to sleep. Because the most underrated advantage in money is not brilliance. It is having time and being able to use it. And there's a quiet kindness in remembering this because it dissolves envy. When you see someone else's success, you don't have to turn it into a verdict about yourself. You can simply say, their tide came in at a different moment, and my tide will come in when it comes. In the book, this is one way we make peace with the strange unfairness of financial outcomes. Not by denying effort, not by denying discipline, but by admitting that life is not a controlled experiment. It is a long walk through changing seasons, and money is only one companion on that walk. So tonight, let the comparison loosen. Let your mind stop racing to catch up to someone else's timeline. Your life has its own pace, and your plan can match it quietly, patiently, without rushing the night. From here, we can meet two companions that quietly follow every financial story: luck and risk. They are like twins walking a few steps behind the main character, rarely photographed, rarely credited, yet always present. Luck is the wind at your back that you didn't summon. Risk is the thin ice under your feet that you didn't notice until it cracked. And because we prefer simple explanations, we often erase them. We look at a successful investor, a thriving business, a person who became wealthy, and we tell a clean story about skill, discipline, and intelligence. Those things matter. But the book gently reminds us that sometimes success is also being in the right place at the right time, meeting the right person, avoiding the one terrible accident, choosing a career just as an industry begins to bloom. In the same way, failure can be a kind of bad weather. A smart person can be struck by a recession at the exact wrong moment, or a medical emergency, or a job loss, or a partner's illness, and the math stops being the main factor. This is why luck and risk feel uncomfortable. They threaten the comforting idea that outcomes are perfectly deserved. But they also offer compassion. They help us look at others with less judgment and look at ourselves with less shame. And then, just beneath luck and risk, there is another quiet idea: the room you didn't see. When we judge a decision, we usually judge it by what happened. But the bigger truth is what could have happened. A risky gamble that paid off can look brilliant, even if it nearly failed. A cautious choice that missed a boom can look foolish, even if it prevented a disaster. In finance, the paths that almost happened are invisible. No one writes headlines about the collapse that didn't occur or the bankruptcy avoided by a boring decision or the panic that was resisted on an ordinary Tuesday. So tonight, let your mind imagine that hidden room, full of alternate timelines, not to scare yourself, but to soften the harshness of simple judgments, to remember that endurance is often built from the decisions no one applauds, the ones that quietly keep you in the game. You can think of this like looking at a finished bridge from a distance. You see the span, the elegance, the way it seems to float, but you don't see the stress tests, the near misses, the storms it was built to survive. Real financial success is often less about making the flashiest choice. It is about avoiding the single catastrophic mistake that ends the story early. That's why humility matters. When luck has helped you, you don't have to pretend you controlled the wind. And when risk has hurt you, you don't have to believe it proves you were careless or broken. Sometimes it simply means you were human in a world that changes. Tonight, we let that truth settle like a blanket, not heavy, just honest and strangely calming. And when we forget the hidden room, we fall into a very common illusion: survivorship. It sounds like a complicated word, but it's simply this: we learn from the winners because they are visible. The companies that survived write books, give interviews, appear in documentaries, and sit proudly at the end of the story. But the companies that tried the same strategy and quietly disappeared are not here to speak. The investors who took the same risks and were wiped out do not host podcasts about it. The families who stretched too far or borrowed too much or trusted one sure thing and then lost their footing, they rarely become case studies. So the lessons we absorb from the world are biased toward what survived. It's like walking through a museum of success with bright lighting on the exhibits and forgetting that outside the building there are countless unopened boxes never displayed. The book invites us to notice that bias, not to become cynical, but to become wiser, to ask gently, how many others did this not work for? What did the winners have that isn't being mentioned? What risks were taken that could have ended differently? Because once you see survivorship, you start to value quiet durability. You start to admire plans that can survive bad luck, not just plans that shine in good times. And slowly, almost without realizing it, you begin to change what you're aiming for. Instead of the biggest return, you begin to want the return you can actually hold. Instead of the fastest path, you begin to want the path you can walk without trembling. This is where another small word begins to appear in the background, like a dim light turning on down the hall. Enough, not as a limit meant to punish you, but as a threshold where peace becomes possible, where more stops improving life and starts quietly stealing from it. For now, just let that word rest on the nightstand of your mind. Enough, like a soft exhale. Enough, like a door that can close gently on the noise of comparison. And as you listen, remember, the goal is not to impress an imaginary audience. The goal is to build a life that can last and still feel calm even when the world outside is changing. Imagine a campfire in the desert. From far away, you can see the flames of the people who made it through the night. Bright, obvious, easy to point at. But you cannot see the fires that went out earlier, the sparks that failed, the travelers who turned back, or the wood that was never dry enough. Survivorship is forgetting all of that. So we choose a little more margin. We carry a little more water. We keep our pace gentle enough to reach the next horizon. And in money, that margin is often what lets you sleep. And from that quiet museum of winners, we let a small word rest on the nightstand. Enough. It sounds simple, almost too simple, like a child's drawing of a house. But in money, enough is one of the hardest ideas to hold, because the world keeps suggesting a different finish line. You see it in photos, in headlines, in someone else's upgrade that appears overnight. You see it in the quiet pressure to prove that you are doing well, even if you already are. And so more begins to feel like safety, when sometimes it's just noise. The book offers a calm reminder. The hardest financial skill is not earning or investing or predicting. It is saying no, not no to life, not no to joy, but no to the endless comparison game. The game where you can win every year and still feel behind. Comparison is a moving treadmill. The speed changes without warning, and the display is always telling you that someone else is ahead. And the strange thing is, if you run long enough, you forget why you stepped on it. So tonight, we gently step off. We remember that money is not only a tool for getting things, it is also a tool for protecting your attention. Because attention is where peace lives. When you chase approval through spending, you pay with attention. You pay with your nervous system. You pay with the quiet ability to enjoy what is already enough. This is why the book separates two words that people often confuse: rich and wealthy. Rich is visible. It is the car that passes you, the watch that catches the light, the holiday photos that look effortless. Rich is what you spend. Wealth is invisible. It is what you keep. It is the money sitting quietly in the background, not asking to be admired, simply waiting to be useful. Wealth is the ability to say, I can choose. I can leave. I can rest. I can wait. I don't have to take the first offer or the first fear or the first temptation. So if your mind wanders tonight to someone else's life, someone else's pace, someone else's display, let it soften. Their spending is not a scoreboard you must chase. Their visibility is not a measure of your worth. Your peace is allowed to be your goal. Housel points out that the hunger for more is often not hunger for comfort. It is hunger for status. The feeling of being respected, safe, and seen. But status is expensive because it is rented from other people, and the rent rises whenever someone else remodels their life. So, one of the kindest financial choices is to decide, privately, what you are trying to protect. Is it security or an image? Is it freedom or applause? When you know the answer, the next no becomes less harsh. It becomes a boundary drawn in soft pencil that keeps your nights quiet. And enough, when you find it, is not resignation. It is freedom in a quiet form, like a lamp you can turn off and finally let the room go dark. Tonight, we bring a gentle light to one of the most underrated forces in the book, time. People talk about investing as if the secret is intelligence, as if the world rewards the sharpest mind, the fastest reflexes, the perfect prediction. But Housel keeps returning to something quieter, compounding, not as a formula on a whiteboard, but as a temperament, a willingness to let good things take their slow shape. Compounding is what happens when you stop interrupting the process. When you allow small gains to stack on top of each other year after year, like thin layers of paint that eventually become a rich color. And the strange part is, the biggest results often arrive late. A tree does not look impressive in its first season. It looks like a promise. But given enough time, the trunk thickens, the branches widen, the shade becomes real. Money can grow in the same patient way, if you give it the room. The challenge is that time feels boring. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with ordinary months, ordinary statements, and stretches where nothing exciting seems to happen. And that boredom is where many people sabotage themselves. They change plans too often. They chase whatever seems hottest. They treat investing like a series of short races when it is closer to a long walk. Housel's point is gentle. You don't need to be the best investor. You need to be the investor who can keep going. The one who can let a plan run for years without needing constant proof that it is working. Because the enemy of compounding is not only bad luck, it is impatience. It is the urge to do something just to feel in control. So tonight, imagine time as a quiet ally. Imagine it as a wide river that carries small boats farther than any frantic rowing could. Your job is not to fight the river. Your job is to stay in the boat, keep it steady and avoid the rocks that flip you over. And when your mind asks, is this enough? Or should I change everything? You can answer softly, let time do its work. Not tomorrow, not next week, but over the kind of years that change a life without making much noise. Housel notes that many fortunes are not built by constant brilliance. They are built by a few good decades protected from the one moment of ruin. Fees, taxes, and frantic trading all act like tiny leaks in the boat. You may not notice them in a week, but over years they change how far you can travel. So simplicity can be powerful. A plan you understand, a pace you can keep, and the patience to let average become extraordinary over time. As you settle deeper into bed, let that idea loosen your grip. You do not have to force the future. You can build a plan that is calm enough to endure, and then let time quietly carry it forward. If compounding is the quiet engine, then staying in the game is the fuel. Housel has a simple phrase for it. It worked because it lasted, not because every year was perfect, not because every decision was genius, but because the plan survived long enough for time to do its slow work. This is where the book becomes almost protective. It warns gently about the kind of mistake that ends the story early. Ruin. Ruin is not underperforming for a while. Ruin is being forced out of the market or out of your plan at the worst possible moment. Ruin is taking on so much debt, so much leverage, so much fragile complexity that a normal storm becomes fatal. And storms are normal. Markets fall, jobs change, life surprises. So the goal is not to build a plan that shines in perfect weather. The goal is to build a plan that stays upright in rain. One way to think about this is margin, extra room, money you don't need next month. A lifestyle that doesn't require everything to go right. A portfolio that doesn't depend on a single prediction. Margin looks boring from the outside. It can even look like you are wasting potential. But margin is what buys you time, and time is what lets you avoid panic. This is why you'll often hear people say, after a crisis, I sold at the bottom. They didn't sell because they wanted to. They sold because they had to. Because their plan left no room for being wrong or being unlucky or being human. And this is also why the market's greatest danger isn't the daily drop that scares you. It's the decision you make when you feel cornered. So tonight, let your mind imagine a simple shelter, a cabin built not for beauty, but for warmth. Thick walls, a steady roof, a little wood stacked for winter. In money, that shelter can be an emergency fund. It can be lower debt. It can be a slower pace of spending. It can be choosing investments you can hold through discomfort, not because you expect disaster every day, but because you respect that disaster visit sometimes. And if your plan can survive those visits quietly, without collapse, then you get the one advantage that beats almost everything. you get to keep playing. And in the long run, the people who keep playing are often the ones who win, not by spectacle, but by endurance. Housel points out that financial histories are shaped by a small number of extreme moments, a few crashes, a few booms, a few years that decide whether you stay calm or break. Because of that, you don't need to capture every upside. You need to avoid the downside that ends your participation. There is a quiet wisdom in never risking what you already have for something you don't truly need. Tonight, let that wisdom feel like a steady hand on the shoulder. Now, as the night deepens, we can let go of another myth, that the best plan is always the most rational one. Rational sounds clean. It sounds like you removed emotion from the room and replaced it with perfect logic. But humans do not live inside equations. We live inside days. We get tired. We get scared. We get tempted. We scroll. We compare. We imagine worst-case futures at 2 in the morning. So Housel offers a gentler target. Be reasonable. Reasonable means your plan fits your life. It means you can follow it even when you are not at your best. Because a perfect strategy that you abandon during stress is worse than a good strategy you can stick with. This is where simple rules become soothing. Not rules as punishment, but rules as guardrails. A guardrail does not stop you from traveling. It simply keeps you from falling off the edge when visibility is low. You might decide, for example, that you won't check your portfolio every hour, or that you won't invest money you might need soon, or that you'll keep a cushion even if it feels inefficient. These decisions can look unoptimized on paper, but they protect your behavior, and behavior is the real driver. And then there is the quiet ache of what if, regret, the mind's habit of replaying the path you didn't take as if you could have known the future. If you bought a stock and it fell, you imagine you should have waited. If you waited and it rose, you imagine you should have bought. No matter what you did, there is always a story the mind can invent to make you feel foolish. So the book suggests something kind. Build a plan that assumes you will sometimes feel regret. Assume you will sometimes feel wrong. Assume you will sometimes wish you had done the opposite. When you expect those feelings, they lose some power. They become weather, not prophecy. And in that moment, you can return to your rules, your guardrails, your reasonable path. Reasonable also respects temperament. Some people can watch markets swing and feel nothing. Others feel each drop in their chest, as if it were personal. Neither is better, but each needs a different plan. A portfolio that keeps you awake is too aggressive, even if it promises higher returns. Sleep is a real asset. Peace is a real dividend. So the best decision is often the one that lets you continue living your life while the market does what it does, quietly, without stealing your breath. Tonight, let reasonable feel like a soft blanket. It doesn't need to impress anyone. It doesn't need to win arguments on the internet. It only needs to keep you steady enough to last. Because lasting is what turns ordinary decisions into a life that feels secure, one quiet year at a time. And now we arrive at a lesson that feels almost like bedtime advice. Plan for the days when you won't feel brave, because you will have those days. Everyone does. There will be mornings when the news feels heavy, when the market feels like a storm, when your mind starts bargaining for certainty. In those moments, the danger isn't that you feel fear. The danger is that you pretend you won't and build a plan that only works when you are calm. So, Housel suggests designing your financial life with the assumption that you will sometimes be tired, impulsive, stressed, and human. This is why margin of safety is not just an investing phrase. It is a kindness you build into your future. It can be savings. It can be a lower fixed cost lifestyle. It can be avoiding debts that trap you. It can be choosing a portfolio that you can hold through a rough year without needing to sell. And then there is volatility, the price of admission. Many people treat market swings as punishment, as a sign that they did something wrong. But the book reframes it softly. Volatility is a fee. You pay it for the possibility of long-term growth. It isn't pleasant, but it is part of the deal. Like turbulence on a flight. The plane shakes, your stomach tightens, but it doesn't mean the journey is failing. It means you are moving through air that changes. When you expect volatility, you stop interpreting it as a personal message. You stop treating every drop as a command. You can breathe and keep your seatbelt on and let the turbulence pass. Housel notes that the most rewarding things often have a price that isn't listed on a receipt. In investing, that price is watching your account drop at times, sometimes sharply, without knowing when it will recover. If you demand a world with no drawdowns, you usually end up paying a different price, missing the growth that comes after. So the goal isn't to eliminate discomfort. It's to size your risk so the discomfort is tolerable. So you don't make a permanent decision in a temporary storm. This is also where savings becomes quietly powerful. Savings is not only money. Savings is options. It is the ability to wait. The ability to say no to bad deals, bad jobs, bad timing. The ability to handle a surprise without turning your whole life upside down. In a loud world, savings is a soft form of dignity. So tonight, as the room darkens, imagine your plan as something built for real weather, not fragile. Not impressive, just sturdy. A plan that allows you to be wrong sometimes. A plan that can take a hit and still stand. A plan that does not require constant heroism from you. And if you can build that, the book suggests you can do one of the most valuable things in finance. You can sleep well while time quietly does its work. And now, as we move forward, the book offers a quiet question. What is money actually for? Not in theory, not in a clever sentence, but in the real shape of a human life. For many people, the answer they chase is more. More income, more return, more proof that they are doing well. But Housel gently turns the lamp toward something softer. Freedom, not the dramatic kind, not the kind you announce. The quiet freedom of being able to decide what you do with your next hour. Money, at its best, is a tool that buys control of your time. It lets you leave a job that is draining you. It lets you say no to a deal that feels wrong. It lets you pause, breathe, recover, and choose again. And that kind of freedom is strangely invisible because it often looks like nothing happened. No big purchase, no new status symbol, just a calm choice that was available because you had room. This is why wealth can be so quiet. It isn't always a mansion on a hill. Sometimes it is the ability to walk away from an argument, a pressure, a fear, and return to your own pace. It is the ability to wait when waiting is the most powerful move. Housel points out that people often use money to buy things when what they truly want is to buy time. They want less alarm in their mornings, less bargaining with deadlines, less feeling that life is owned by someone else's calendar. And the paradox is, you rarely get that freedom by trying to look rich. Looking rich usually means spending now. Freedom usually means not spending now. It means keeping a portion of your income unclaimed by the present, so the future has options. So tonight, if your mind is tempted by an image of success, let it soften into a question. Will this purchase buy me freedom, or will it rent me approval? Will it open my time, or tighten it? Because when money buys freedom, it buys a kind of calm that cannot be photographed. It buys the ability to live with less fear of the next surprise. And in a world that constantly asks you to prove yourself, that freedom is a gentle kind of wealth. Let that idea settle like a warm, steady light, not dazzling, just enough to see the next step and to feel that you are not trapped. You are allowed to aim for a life that feels spacious. You are allowed to want your evenings back. You are allowed to let money serve your time, and not the other way around. Sometimes the clearest picture of this is simple. A day where you can take a slow walk in the afternoon without asking permission. A moment where a bad boss, a bad client, or a bad situation loses its power because you are not desperate. This is why Housel treats independence as the highest return, not the biggest number, but the strongest ability to choose. And tonight, as your breathing slows, you can let that be your compass. Not, how can I get the most? But, how can I build a life I don't need to escape? From freedom, the book moves to a quiet habit that makes freedom possible. Saving. Saving, in this telling, isn't a scolding. It isn't a moral test or a sign that you must deny yourself joy. It is simply the space between what you earn and what you spend. A space that becomes options. Savings is what allows you to make decisions slowly. It is what lets you breathe before you respond. It is what turns a surprise from a crisis into an inconvenience. And there is a gentle dignity in that, because when you have savings, you are less likely to be cornered. You are less likely to accept the first offer out of fear. You are less likely to borrow at the worst moment, sell at the worst moment, or say yes to something that doesn't fit your life. Housel points out that people often imagine saving as a step toward buying something later. But often, the thing you are buying is not an object. It is control. It is the ability to wait. It is the ability to choose the right job, the right move, the right timing, rather than the fastest escape. Savings is also a form of resilience, because it respects that life does not move in straight lines. Cars break. Health surprises. Markets wobble. Plans change. So saving is like packing a small umbrella, even on a day that looks clear. You don't pack it because you expect rain every minute. You pack it because rain sometimes arrives without asking. And the most calming part is that savings doesn't require you to be brilliant. You don't have to predict the next trend. You don't have to beat anyone. You just need to build a gap again and again until the gap becomes a cushion. In the book, this is why high savings rates can matter more than high investment returns. Returns depend on what the world gives you. Savings depend mostly on what you choose. That choice might be modest, quiet, almost unglamorous, and yet it can be the foundation of calm. So tonight, imagine savings as something soft. Not a pile of cash, but a layer of insulation, like extra blankets folded at the foot of the bed. Most nights, you won't need them, but on the cold nights, you'll be grateful they exist. And perhaps the deepest comfort is this. When you save, you are telling your future self, I'm here for you. You are sending help forward through time. You are building a small bridge between who you are now and who you will be later, when the world feels different. That bridge is quiet. It doesn't sparkle, but it holds weight. And because it holds weight, it lets you rest. It lets you sleep, knowing that tomorrow doesn't have to be perfect for you to be okay. Even a little savings can change the feeling of a room. It turns the future from a threat into a horizon. And when the horizon looks gentler, the mind can finally unclench. And yet, the world has a quiet way of pulling that cushion away without any drama at all. It happens through normal. Normal is the new phone, because everyone has one. Normal is the bigger apartment, because your friends moved. Normal is the dinners that become expected, the subscriptions that pile up like dust, the upgrades that feel small, one by one. Housel calls attention to how spending tends to rise with income almost automatically, not because people become greedy, but because their surroundings change. Their reference point shifts. A raise arrives, and soon the raise feels like the baseline, and then life expands to fill it. This is lifestyle creep, the soft trap that doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like progress. It feels like reward. And sometimes it is, but the danger is subtle. If your costs rise until there is no margin, then every month requires constant success. You must keep earning at the same level. You must keep winning. You must keep the machine running. And that is the opposite of freedom. The book suggests that one of the most powerful money skills is resisting the urge to spend simply because you can. Not from deprivation, but from clarity. Because what you are protecting is not the number in your account. You are protecting the flexibility in your life. You are protecting the ability to handle a surprise without panic. You are protecting your time. And normal often threatens that, because normal is social. It's not a spreadsheet decision. It's the feeling of being seen. So tonight, let yourself notice how often spending is really about belonging. A new outfit, a new car, a new vacation. Sometimes they are joy. Sometimes they are a way of saying, I'm okay. But the world can always raise the standard. There is always a more expensive neighborhood, a more curated lifestyle, a more polished version of success. If you chase it, you end up paying for it with anxiety, with the sense that you can never slow down. Housel offers a gentle practice. Define what is enough for you privately and treat that definition as sacred. Not because you reject comfort, but because you refuse to let comfort turn into a cage. This can mean spending on what you genuinely love and ignoring what you only want because others will notice. It can mean upgrading slowly or not at all in the parts of life that don't matter to you. It can mean keeping your lifestyle beneath your income even when your income rises, so your freedom rises too. And tonight, as your breathing stays slow, you can let that idea feel like permission. You don't have to match the world's definition of normal. You can build your own. You can choose a quieter kind of success, one that leaves room to rest. When we talk about money, we often argue as if one person must be right and the other must be wrong. But Housel points out something calmer. People are often disagreeing because they lived through different worlds. Your money beliefs were shaped by your household, your era, your memories. If your family lived through inflation that ate away at savings, you may distrust cash. If your family lived through a stock market crash, you may distrust investing. If you grew up watching layoffs, you may value security over upside. If you grew up during stable growth, you may assume that risk always pays. None of these feelings are irrational. They are experiences turned into instinct. This is why different generations give different advice. Someone who built wealth in a time of cheap housing and strong wage growth tells a story that sounds simple. Someone who came of age with high debt, expensive housing, and unstable work tells a different story. Both stories are true for the world that shaped them. So, the book invites you to hold your own money story with curiosity. Where did it come from? Which moments wrote it? Which fears, which hopes, which examples became your definition of safe? Because once you see your story, you can choose which parts to keep and which parts to soften. You can say, that belief protected me once, and also, it may not serve me forever. This is one of the most soothing moves you can make with money, separating the past from the present, not by denying history, but by noticing it. And then the book adds another quiet lens: incentives. When you feel confused by the system, ask a simple question: what does this reward? A company is rewarded for growth. A politician may be rewarded for being liked today, not for being right later. A social media feed is rewarded for keeping you scrolling, not for keeping you calm. Even within our own lives, we are rewarded for looking successful, not for feeling peaceful. So incentives shape behavior, often invisibly. They nudge people toward risk, or toward fear, or toward spending, or toward denial. And when you see that, you can stop taking every message personally. You can stop believing that the loudest advice is always the wisest. You can step back and ask quietly, who benefits if I do this? That question is not cynical. It is clarifying. It turns confusion into a map. And tonight, as the room stays dim, that map can help you hold money talk with less tension. You can let other people's certainty drift past. You can build a plan based on your world, your temperament, your timeline, and let it be enough. Because the goal is not to win debates about the future. The goal is to live through the future with steadiness and to keep your nights gentle. With all these stories and incentives swirling, the mind can start craving complexity. A perfect strategy, a system that predicts every turn, a portfolio that is optimized down to the last decimal. But Housel suggests the opposite. In a world that changes, simple rules can be stronger than complicated ones, because complexity is fragile. It breaks when life surprises you. It breaks when markets move in ways no model expected. It breaks when your emotions arrive uninvited on a hard day. Simple rules are like stones in a river. The water can rush, but the stones hold. A few gentle guardrails: save consistently, avoid ruin, keep margin, invest for the long run, ignore the noise, often beat constant optimization. Not because they are mathematically perfect, but because they are livable. And then the book warns about extremes: the seduction of being too optimistic or too pessimistic. Extreme optimism feels warm. It says everything will work out. It can lead to haste, leverage, and the belief that the future owes you a smooth path. When optimism becomes certainty, people take risks they cannot survive. Extreme pessimism feels smart. It says, I'm being realistic, but pessimism can freeze you. It can keep you on the sidelines while time passes, and compounding quietly works for someone else. Fear protects, but it also costs. So the book points toward a balance that sounds almost like bedtime advice. Prepare for the worst, but invest for the long run. Keep enough margin to handle storms, but don't let storms steal your whole horizon. This is where humility becomes a gentle superpower. Markets don't owe explanations. They can stay irrational longer than you expect. They can reward boring patience and punish brilliant certainty. So humility doesn't mean you give up. It means you build a plan that survives being wrong. You diversify. You avoid betting the whole story on one chapter. You accept that uncertainty is permanent and design your life around that truth. And perhaps the most calming part is this. When you stop chasing perfection, you stop living on the edge of panic. You stop treating every headline like a verdict. You return to your simple rules, your steady rhythm, your long horizon. Tonight, let those rules feel like the soft rail beside a dark staircase. You don't need to see every step in advance. You just need something steady under your hand. And with steadiness, you can keep moving quietly year after year until the idea of enough begins to feel not like a limit, but like peace. Risk, in this book, is not a badge. It should match your timeline and your ability to stay calm when the screen turns red. If a plan costs you sleep, it is charging too much. So you choose a balance that lets you live your life while your money works in the background. Because life is bigger than money, and money is meant to serve that larger life quietly. Now, as we move toward the end of our sleepy summary, we can gather the threads we've been holding. There is enough, resting like a small stone in the palm. There is time, moving quietly, doing its patient work. There is the reminder to stay in the game, to avoid the kind of single mistake that ends the story early. And there is the gentle truth that your plan doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be livable. Housel returns again and again to a kind of humility. Markets don't care about your hopes, and they don't punish you out of spite. They move, sometimes smoothly, sometimes like waves that come out of nowhere. So we stop demanding that they be fair in the short run, and instead we build for survival. This is where the idea of balance becomes practical. We prepare for the worst because the worst visits sometimes. But we invest for the long run because the long run is where compounding lives. We keep margin in our budgets, in our portfolios, in our expectations, so we don't become fragile. And we match risk to our timeline and temperament. If you need the money soon, you don't treat it like a long-term bet. If volatility makes your chest tighten, you don't pretend it won't. You choose a level of risk you can hold through storms without making permanent decisions in temporary fear. This is one of the book's most caring points. Risk is not a competition. It's not about being brave in public. It's about staying calm in private. If your strategy requires you to be heroic every time the world shakes, it will eventually break you. So You build something steady enough to last, and you let reasonable lead, not because you are settling, but because you are choosing durability. Tonight, you can imagine your financial life like a sailboat. You cannot control the wind, but you can choose how much sail to raise. Too much sail, and a gust can capsize you. Too little sail, and you go nowhere. So, you choose a sail size that lets you move forward while staying upright. That is the quiet balance, moving without tipping. And in that balance, there is a kind of peace that numbers alone cannot measure. A peace that comes from knowing you are not depending on perfection. You are depending on endurance. And endurance in this book is the real advantage. And then, just beneath all these ideas about risk and time, the book offers one last soft shift. It asks you to remember that money is a tool, not a scoreboard, not a measure of character, not a proof that you are worthy. Because if money becomes a scoreboard, the game never ends. There is always someone with more. There is always another comparison. There is always another rung on the ladder, another lifestyle to chase, another version of success that looks brighter from a distance. But if money is a tool, then the question becomes gentler. What is it for? What does it help you do? What does it protect? What does it allow you to become? Housel's quiet wisdom is that the goal is not a life filled with purchases. It's a life filled with agency, with choices that belong to you, with time that isn't constantly sold away, with relationships that aren't strained by stress, with evenings where you can breathe without the feeling that something is chasing you. This is why we can say calmly that peace is a legitimate financial goal. Not because you stop caring about growth, but because growth is not the only form of wealth. A person who sleeps well, who has options, who can walk away from pressure, is wealthy in a way that doesn't show in photos. A person who never feels enough, who is always chasing status, can be rich and still feel trapped. So tonight, if your mind tries to turn money into a judgment, let it soften. Your worth is not your return. Your value is not your net worth. You are not a chart that must go up forever. You are a human life, moving through changing seasons, doing the best you can with incomplete information. And the book's kindness is in acknowledging that truth. It doesn't demand that you become fearless. It suggests you become prepared. It doesn't demand that you become perfect. It suggests you become consistent. It doesn't demand that you win. It suggests you build something that lasts. So, as you rest, let money return to its proper size. Important, yes, but not holy. Useful, but not defining. A tool that can help you build a life that feels stable and meaningful and quiet. Now we can offer a simple bedtime recap, like gathering small objects back into a drawer. First, money is behavior, not math. It's shaped by stories, your upbringing, your era, your memories. the experiences that taught you what safe means. Second, outcomes depend on timing as much as talent. Two people can do similar things and end up in different places, not because one is better, but because life placed them in different weather. Third, luck and risk travel together. So we practice humility when things go well and compassion when things go poorly. We remember the room we didn't see, the alternate outcomes that could have happened, and we avoid judging everything by a single visible result. Fourth, time is the quiet advantage. Compounding is patience, surviving boredom, noise, and the urge to interrupt the process. Fifth, staying in the game matters. Avoid ruin. Keep margin. Build a plan that survives storms, so you can be present for the long years when growth quietly accumulates. Sixth, reasonable beats rational. A plan you can stick with is more powerful than a plan that looks perfect but collapses under stress. So we plan for bad days. We treat volatility as a fee, not a punishment. We build guardrails and simple rules because complexity breaks easily. Seventh, enough is a real goal. Wealth is often invisible. Rich is what you spend. Wealth is what you keep. And the quiet purpose of wealth is freedom. Freedom to choose. Freedom to wait. Freedom to live without needing constant approval. And finally, life is bigger than money. Money is not a scoreboard. It is a tool that can support meaning, relationships, health, and time. A calm life is not a consolation prize. It is a form of success. So tonight, you can let these ideas fade into the background, the way a calm lecture fades as sleep arrives. You don't have to memorize them. You only have to let them soften the grip of worry. And if one idea stays with you, let it be this: peace is allowed. Enough is allowed. And the future does not need to be perfectly controlled for you to be okay. And now we let that recap settle, the way a page settles back into a book when you stop holding it open. Nothing here needs to be debated tonight, and nothing needs to be perfected in your mind, because the lessons have already done what they came to do. They've softened the sharp edges of worry. You can imagine your life as something wider than money, wider than any single decision, like a shoreline stretching beyond what you can see. Some parts are bright with sun, some parts are wrapped in mist, and some parts are marked by footprints that fade behind you, not as mistakes, but as proof you kept walking. Your relationship with money learned its shape through ordinary days, not through dramatic speeches. It learned in the kitchen light when bills were opened, and in the quiet tone people used when they talked about security. It learned from your first paycheck, and the first unexpected expense, and the first time you realized the world can change without warning. And because it learned through emotion, it sometimes speaks in emotion. It speaks in urgency, in comparison, in that strange pressure to keep up, as if your worth were something that could be measured from the outside. So tonight, we don't fight those feelings. We simply step back and see them for what they are. Old instincts doing their best in a world that isn't designed to be soothing. And here, in this calmer room, you can choose a different posture. You can become the person who makes room. Room in the budget, so a surprise doesn't become a crisis. Room in the plan, so being wrong doesn't become ruin. Room in the mind, so every headline doesn't become a verdict, because room is what prevents panic, and panic is what turns temporary storms into permanent choices. You can feel the difference even in your body. Panic is tight shoulders, a clenched jaw, a breath that forgets how to be slow. Room is space behind the ribs, a longer exhale, a sense that you do not have to decide everything tonight. And if the word enough still echoes softly, let it echo in a kinder way. Enough as a boundary that protects your attention. Enough as a quiet ending to the comparison game. Enough as the moment you stop trying to impress strangers you will never meet, with money that was meant to serve your own life. You can picture the difference between being rich and being wealthy again. Rich is bright and visible, like a window lit up for an audience. Wealth is quieter, like a lamp left on for yourself in the hallway of your future. Wealth looks like options. Wealth looks like the ability to wait. Wealth looks like saying no without fear. No to fragile deals, no to unnecessary debt, no to the kind of spending that buys applause but steals peace. And waiting, in this story, is not weakness. Waiting is strength with a calm face. It is patience, surviving boredom, surviving noise, surviving the urge to do something just to feel in control. If your mind tries to sprint ahead into forecasts and what-ifs, bring it back gently. Bring it back to the bed, to the softness under your head, to the weight of the blanket, to the quiet fact that the future does not become safer because you stare at it longer. And if regret rises, an old mistake, a missed chance, a moment you replay, let it be held with compassion. You chose with incomplete information. You chose as a human being. That is not failure. It is reality. And reality is something you can live with. Tonight, your task is not to become flawless. Your task is to become steady. To be the kind of person who keeps going, keeps saving, keeps choosing reasonable, even when the world isn't smooth. A plan that survives is often a quiet plan, a simple plan, a plan that expects storms and therefore isn't shocked by them. So now, imagine closing the book gently, not slamming it shut, not ending anything abruptly, just closing it calmly and setting it down on a table. The lessons remain inside, and they don't need your effort to stay there. And you remain here, warm, still, breathing, letting the night do the work you don't need to do. And now, we take our final soft landing. Imagine you are walking through a house at night, moving slowly, barefoot, the floor cool beneath you, the air quiet enough to hear your own breathing. You turn off lights one by one, a small lamp in the living room where the day was once loud, a hallway light that cast long shadows, a kitchen light that made ordinary objects gleam for a moment before they returned to softness. Each click is a gentle permission. Each click is a signal to the nervous system. You can stop. The world can wait outside the door. The markets can move without you watching them. The headlines can keep talking without you listening. The comparisons can keep spinning without you stepping onto the treadmill. You have done enough for today. Now imagine, with the same calm, that you place your unfinished thoughts into safe containers, the way you might place delicate glass into a box lined with cloth, a container for plans, a container for bills, a container for decisions you will make later, when the sun is up, when the mind is clearer, when the body is rested. You don't have to solve anything in the dark. You don't have to rehearse worst-case scenarios like they are protective spells. The future does not become kinder just because you worry at it. And beneath all those containers, beneath all those categories, there is something simple you're allowed to keep. Breath. One slow inhale, arriving like a tide. One slow exhale, leaving like a tide. Again and again. If a thought appears, you don't have to chase it. You can watch it drift by like a boat moving along a dark river, carrying its small lantern of light, never asking you to follow. You can let the boat pass. You can return to the river itself, steady, quiet, moving forward without effort. This is where the real wealth is, in this moment, not in numbers, not in status, not in being right, but in having enough space inside you to rest, enough space to feel your shoulders release, enough space to let your jaw unclench, enough space to let your hands loosen as if they no longer need to hold the day. And perhaps that is the most bedtime-friendly lesson of all. Peace is not something you earn by getting everything perfect. Peace is something you practice by letting go, one small moment at a time. So tonight, let the word enough become a lullaby. Enough effort, enough noise, enough chasing, enough proving, enough to let your life be a life, not a race. If your mind returns to fear, meet it gently. Fear is often just the mind trying to protect you using old tools. You can thank it softly and set it down. You can remind it that you have guardrails. You can remind it that you have margin. You can remind it that storms are a fee you sometimes pay, not a punishment you must interpret. And if a storm comes, you won't need to be heroic. You'll only need to be steady. And steadiness is something you can return to even in small doses. A slower breath, a simpler plan, a calmer decision made in daylight, not in midnight. So now, let the room fade. Let the body sink deeper into the bed. Let the breath slow until it feels like it belongs to the night itself. If this sleepy summary brought you calm, You can follow SleepWise for more gentle retellings, books, ideas, histories, made for the hours when you want your mind to soften. And if someone you love carries money worries in the dark, you can share this with them, like leaving a small lamp on in the hallway. Now, let the lessons drift into the background, like music's from another room. Let the future remain unfinished and still feel safe. Let the present be simple: breath, warmth, stillness. And when sleep comes, quietly, naturally, you can let it take you without resistance. Good night.